I would like to welcome everyone to today's Art and Conversation. As always, we're going to cover a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the meat of the program today. I'd first like to start off with mentioning or drawing your attention to captions. Automated real-time captioning can be turned on by clicking the CC Live transcript button at the bottom of the Zoom window and choosing Show Captions. Once on, you can click the caption box with your cursor and move it around the screen. And then if you're watching or joining us through Facebook, captions can be turned on by clicking the settings gear icon on Facebook Live and choosing captions. If you have any questions or need technical assistance regarding access, please notify us in the Q&A and we will be happy to assist you. And I would also like to draw your attention to the next tool in accessibility that we often use and we're building into our programs more and more, verbal descriptions. In addition to captions, we use verbal descriptions primarily for all of our speakers in the program. And this process of verbal descriptions helps to just give a good sense of who each speaker is, especially for audience members who are not able to see the screen at the time of the program. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Jaleesa Johnston. I work as programs lead in the Learning and Community Partnerships Department at the Portland Art Museum. For my verbal description, I'm a Black woman. I'm wearing black rimmed glasses. I have silver hoop earrings. I have on a gray sweater. And I have curly black hair that is about shoulder length. I'm sitting in a blue room and I have two large bookcases behind me. I would like to also begin our program with a land acknowledgement. While many of you may be joining from elsewhere, around the country or even globe, I want to begin our time together by recognizing and honoring the Indigenous peoples of this region on whose ancestral lands the Portland Art Museum now stands. These include the Willamette Tumwater, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Motlala, Multnomah, and Watlala and Chinook peoples, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, who today are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and many other Native communities who made their homes along the Columbia River. We also want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. And again, I can't say welcome enough. Today, Art and Conversation is a really awesome and special program that I feel very lucky and privileged that we get to continue during the time of the pandemic. To give a little background, before the pandemic, Art and Conversation has always happened on the third Tuesday of every month. It's been a long-standing program at the museum. It's very much about building community and dialogue and conversation around the arts. So typically what would happen is, well, it's always been a free program, still is, and pre-pandemic times, folks would come to the museum in the mornings about 9:15 and have an hour of coffee and donuts and just time to connect with one another and to chat, followed by a 1-hour lecture around 10:15. And these lectures ranged in topic as they do now. They often feature work that is at the museum or on view at the museum right now. But we also talk with other arts leaders, artists in the community, arts organizations to really help build a larger breadth or a sense of what's happening in the Portland arts community. And then following the program, everybody would be able to go into the museum for free and look at all the awesome artwork that's on view. Of course, right now we're doing this a little differently. We're doing this virtually. But one of the awesome things about this virtual format is that we are able to really open up the program to people who were not able to attend previously. So that's been an exciting part of this virtual moment, a nice silver lining. And so I want to welcome everybody, even those of you that have not been able to attend until now. Welcome to Art and Conversation. It's really a lovely program and a moment to connect and reflect and have dialogue. So I also want to shout out a little bit of housekeeping. So during today's program, if you have any questions for our speakers, if you're on Zoom, please enter them in the Q&A box. And then if you're watching on Facebook Live, just enter your questions into the chat, and we have someone who will be feeding them over to us here in Zoom. And I would like to thank our members and supporters for making this program possible for you today. So first off, I just want to say that I am joined by my colleague who is here, Hannah Layson, who is the head of youth and educator programs. And so she has joined me here and is hanging out in the Zoom background and may jump in occasionally. And so with that, I'm very excited to mention that for today's program, I'm pleased to be joined by artist and visual arts district leader for Portland Public Schools, Carolyn Drake, for a look into the formation of this year's Heart of Portland, an annual showcase of the arts programs from across PPS, as well as unexpected shifts in practice and pedagogy that have resulted from distance learning over the past year of the pandemic. Carolyn Hazel Drake is a third-generation Oregonian from a long line of craftswomen. Her creativity was cultivated early on in her mother's quilt store, as was her appreciation for handwork and being a part of a community of makers. She is a textile artist and teaches workshops out of her studio and through Sitka Center for the Arts. Carolyn studied literature and architecture at Portland State University's Honors College and spent a term as a curatorial research and writing intern for the Smithsonian American Art Museum, with a particular focus on sculpture. She earned her M.Ed. from PSU and went on to teach visual arts, art history, and language arts for over a decade in Oregon public schools. Carolyn is currently the visual arts district leader for Portland Public Schools, where she engages in advocacy and supports best practice and professional development for nearly 100 visual arts specialists, serving close to 30,000 students in the district. Since 2018, she has been awarded a Glean residency, a Leland Ironworks residency, and a Subtle Lodge residency. Carolyn is currently a member of Waterstone Gallery, Wave Contemporary, and a standing member of the Portland Art Museum's Teacher Advisory Council. That is, and we're very, very, very lucky to have Carolyn here. Thank you so much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jaleesa. Thank you for such a generous and warm opener. I'll start just by giving a short visual description of myself. I'm a white woman with black hair. I've got short bangs, and today I'm wearing the red lipstick that matches my red cardigan. Behind me is a wall in my studio where I have some textile looms and books. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen now. And I am so excited to be here today to talk about my work in Portland Public Schools, and really to shine a light on the work of all of the community of educators and students that have been finding a way to bring creativity into their lives during what's been the most challenging year in many of our lives. And that's going to be framed by a discussion about something called the Heart of Portland, which is a very celebratory annual event that we are trying to preserve in this digital realm. The reason that event is so wonderful is that it's a product of the partnership, the close partnership that Portland Public Schools Visual and Performing Arts has with the Portland Art Museum, and also the Portland Arts Techs, which has funded so many of our K-5 arts specialists since 2013-14. So as Jaleesa gave me a lovely introduction, so I don't want to go on too much more about myself, but I do want to just show a few pictures. These are student groups that when I was still teaching art and art history that I brought down to the museum. It was my favorite thing to do in the spring to bring groups of students down. And I did that when I taught in Malala, when I taught in Silverton, and then when I taught at Centennial. And seeing the artworks in the museum through the eyes of students is something that I cherish as an experience that I had directly for many years. I'm also a practicing studio artist, and this is true of so many of our arts educators, whether they're visual or performing arts, is that they are still active in their field, they're close to their learning edge, they're engaged in the creative process, and that really informs their classroom practice. So for today, there are a few learning targets. Hopefully you'll become familiar with the scope of what we do in visual and performing arts at PPS, and then learn about what comprehensive distance learning has been like when we were all learning from home full time. You'll learn more about what 2021 Heart of Portland is all about, and also what it's been about in the past. And hear more broadly about the highs, lows, and shifts in practice in visual arts education during this pandemic. So a little bit of an overview of how visual and performing arts looks currently in PPS. I'm on a team of 5 amazing women who each represent their own art form and play a unique role in supporting our 200 programs. We have in dance 17 programs, 23 dance educators, and a pre-professional program at several sites, most notably the Jefferson Dancers. For music, we have 74 programs, 67 educators. We uniquely have a music shop that provides instruments free of charge and instrument support and maintenance, which is something that's quite unique for a district of our size. We have complete K-12 pathways in the Jefferson and Roosevelt cluster, meaning any student who attends a school in those clusters will have access to music every year of their K-12 experience, and then many performance and competition opportunities. For theater, we have 22 programs and 24 educators, and we have technical theater at the middle and high school level. And then for visual arts, we have 71 programs and close to 100 educators. We also have those complete pathways in Jefferson and Roosevelt. The district provides sketchbooks to all students. We have a tight partnership with the Portland Art Museum and many exhibition opportunities throughout the year. We also have a digital gallery and district Instagram. Those will be linked in the slideshow and can be shared out afterwards also. And then we also have many CTE, so career and technical education, and AP and IB course offerings, lots of opportunities for students to get college credit in the arts before graduating. So looking back to look ahead, the arts tax, you may or may not know exactly how it impacts arts education in the city of Portland, but it is profound. Previous to the arts tax, there were only 15 educators in K-5 arts across PPS. And when the arts tax began, it helped to rectify what had been a decades of defunding of arts education that started with Measure 5 and then was compounded with No Child Left Behind's emphasis on core programming over elective offerings. Currently, we have over 63 full-time K-5 arts educators that are funded by the annual arts tax. And over the last 7 years, taxpayers have invested $36 million in making sure that all students have access to a licensed arts educator in every K-5 classroom. So district investments, one of the things when the arts tax was passed is it made very clear that there was an expectation that districts would also lean in and provide additional funding, especially at the 6-12 level, since the tax only funds at the K-5 level. So what we saw in 2013 with the addition of the arts tax was the introduction of a central office staff for visual and performing arts with one position. Then Superintendent Guerrero came on board and he said, we need a strategic plan for the arts. We need a master arts education plan that's really going to create a vision, an aspirational vision for what equitable arts learning can look like. And so that central office team grew, and I joined the team. I was second on the team, and has continued to grow as our scope of our work has increased and as we started to see the completion of those pathways. So I mentioned Jefferson and Roosevelt now have complete K-12 pathways for music and visual arts. We are now moving ahead with those complete pathways next year for the McDaniel cluster, which was formerly Madison, and then in Franklin and Cleveland for Title I schools. This is a central initiative that will ensure equity in students' access to continuous arts learning so that every student has the ability to develop deep technical skill over time. So we're not really talking about the Master Arts Education Plan today, but consider this my one slide that's just a plug of it. That is a separate initiative that is happening that is really informing the decisions that will be made about arts education in PPS for years to come. This is just a snapshot of the strategic goals that are defining that plan. Okay, so I talked about the clusters already. We're making major progress. Our goal is to get visual arts and music in every school across the district, and then also to create targeted opportunities for theater and dance education to ensure that that's also happening at the K-12 spectrum. Okay, now we're going to talk specifically about visual arts education, because if you're here and you got to this presentation through the Portland Art Museum, then in some way or another, visual arts has been key in your life. It's been important to you as a community member, as a way to connect to others, as a way to feel connected to the larger human experience. And so how does that even possibly function during a pandemic? One thing that we shifted immediately towards is having more opportunities to virtually showcase student art. So that was through the creation of our PPS art gallery and through the creation of our Instagram. So there would be a quick way for community members to have an eye on what are some of the things that are still happening in the arts, even if we aren't in person. I'm going to play now the first of, I've got a few videos for you today. I wanted to bring the voices of some of our teachers into this program so that I'm not the only one speaking on behalf of the work that's being done. This is Jay Longfellow, who teaches at James John Elementary. And I gave the teachers the specific prompt of talk about the highs, talk about the lows, and talk about what are some shifts in pedagogy and practice that you think will have lasting implications on your work as a teacher.
Hello, I'm Jay Longfellow. I am the art teacher over at James John Elementary, K-5, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts about this year. It has been a very different year. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was better or worse. It's just a different situation we're in. We definitely had to adapt to a lot of new things, and one of the challenges was probably connecting with students, at least students that weren't already connected either through the internet or through interest. There is a little more drift. So there are some students that I haven't seen as much. But the students that are showing up and that are participating, I think we're getting a much almost richer situation because they get to incorporate into their homes. And I've been able to see projects that we were doing in class where other siblings that wouldn't ever see this happening are coming in, other family members, they're pulling in their parents, and they're working together on art, and they're sharing their art with their families, and they're working together live on art, which is pretty cool to see. Bringing in their own space. I've gotten to know a lot of the families a lot better just by being projected into their living spaces every week. That's pretty cool. And I've definitely been able to connect with my peers, the other art teachers. We've had more connection because it suddenly became much more crucial to work together to get through things. So we get to connect with each other and build on each other's ideas and connect, and yeah, lots of connections. So it's definitely changed the way I think about teaching art, and I've gotten to practice more on video demos, which I was already starting to do in class session. I would use videos as a backup kind of for my teaching. And then finally got around to building my own website, which has been on my list for a long time. And another thing on my list was checking out Seesaw for a digital tool, even in the classroom, which now is like 90% of art class is on Seesaw. So I've gotten very used to that. So definitely planning on bringing a lot of what I've learned this year to the regular classroom. So thanks for letting me share, and I will talk to you later.
All right. I wanted to follow up with his comment about Seesaw. That's maybe unfamiliar to many of you. So with comprehensive distance learning, there are a number of educational platforms that are created. They're called LMS, Learning Management Systems, that are an interface where students and teachers can share lessons, and then students can submit photographs or digital copies of their work, and teachers can give feedback. So one of the unique challenges for our K-5 arts specialists is They have sometimes 500 students. They're seeing every student in the school every week. And that makes it really challenging to give individualized feedback on student work. One of the features of Seesaw is it allows you to record video or audio feedback that then gets sent directly to the student. This is a feature that many of our arts educators are saying that they will hang on to and continue to integrate when they are back in person, because it really gives them that chance to provide critical and positive feedback as students are developing skills over time. All right. So March to June 2020, this was, we had everything was up and running. We were hustling, school was happening, and then the pandemic hit. And March 2020 impacted us all in profound ways. What it meant for our teachers is suddenly they, for the last 3 months of the school year, our specialists at the K-5 level didn't get any face-to-face digital interaction with their students. And that was true of virtually all schools, public schools across the US faced that same situation. So our teachers now had time to create lessons that could be done at home. But that, of course, is also a challenge because you don't know what materials students have access to. Now, I got to give PPS a lot of credit for how hard they worked to get technology into the hands of every student, and so that they would at some point be able to say for certain that students would have access to the synchronous or in-person virtual learning times with their teachers. But while all that was happening, our teachers created something, well, our team centrally created something called teacher planning networks, which was basically pairing groups of teachers to focus on specific grade bands, creating dynamic and flexible arts learning opportunities that really leveraged the fact that kids were at home rather than seeing that as a disadvantage. So this is an example of one of the first activities was called Anything Can Be Art Supplies. And it was a kind of designed as a kind of a scavenger hunt, giving the like all kinds of brainstorming ideas for things that you could use for paint, for instance, that you could use old makeup or food coloring or dried out markers soaked in a cup of water will make a kind of a watercolor paint. And then having students take a photograph of everything that they had collected. This photograph then informed our teachers, what have kids found to work with? How are there any commonalities? Can I create a lesson that uses, say, colored pencils or crayons and know that I've got evidence that every kid's got access to that? So that was a really great way of doing research without just having a survey for kids to identify I do or don't have this particular item. So throughout the spring, our teachers produced an incredible number of resources that were published weekly as PDFs. They were also translated into 6 languages for our schools to be picked up at the nutrition at the distribution hubs, the schools that were providing food for families to pick up. And they were also available to arts educators across the state who are in smaller districts and don't have the same kind of support infrastructure. We were really proud of this work, and it's become a really incredible archive of learning opportunities that did not exist before. I also want to mention that there was a very purposeful and a very intentional focus on anti-racist arts education practices. As you also know, last spring is when we saw just increase in police brutality and protests, and students were very aware of these things happening in the community around them. And the arts are one of the best ways for students to be engaged actively and creatively and positively in whatever social issues the communities are facing. So this was something that our teachers really tried to be intentional and thoughtful about embedding in the resources that they created. We also, that issue with art materials, that's a nut that's hard to crack. So another effort that was made in the spring was centralized funding for art kits for K-8 students. Now, at this point, we didn't have the funding or the structures in place to be certain to distribute kits to every student. So this is last spring, but we did have, we had some teachers create K-5 into 6-8 suggested activities. And then centrally we put together kits for 2,500 students that went out to schools.
Carolyn,
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in real quick. I think you fell out of presentation mode for the slides.
Well, let's do something about that. Thanks for hopping in. Oh, that's much better. Thank you, Jaleesa.
Thank you.
So then moving into the summer, we didn't want to completely drop off providing any resources since families were still needing things for kids to do. And then also, because we have such a close partnership with the Portland Art Museum, and then also another organization called Create More, Fear Less that focuses on reimagining anxiety as something that has a lot of creative potential. So we developed together this program called Journal On that was a summer program of weekly prompts accompanied by artist videos created by local artists using different media who represented different communities and demographics to really create this, the journal as a way for students to process internally and externally all of the things that were happening around them. And that will be launched again, version 2 for this summer. So in the fall, we did have a return to in-person synchronous, still virtual, but synchronous. So kids and teachers meeting together online for all courses. But our teachers also found that they needed to create support documentation for kids who weren't able to be in class or just as a scaffold or support for after the fact. So many of them created YouTube channels and really leaned into the development of their own instructional technology to create that kind of bank of additional support for kids. So I'm going to play just a couple of minutes. This is a video by Kendra Yao, who teaches at Grout Elementary, and she has created videos that are technique tutorials, that are read-alongs of books that accompany the curriculum, that are exploring different artists from different cultures. So I'll just play a couple minutes of this video.
A diagram is a picture with a purpose. Its job is to teach something or help us learn about something. Some artists, called illustrators, have devoted their whole practice to drawing things like natural plants, animals, parts of the human body, or even mechanical people-made objects. Diagrams are drawn clearly, and they can be simple or complex. They usually show all of the parts, and they have labels, which are the words or the names that describe the important parts of the thing being drawn. Beatrix Potter is known for her Peter Rabbit illustrations and stories, but she loved drawing mushrooms. James Audubon loved studying nature as well. Take a look at the inspirational image by artist Sophie Corrigan. She uses a simple drawing and creative humor to label her animal diagrams. Pointing to the small dotted eye on this guinea pig, she says, all-seeing vision beams. To the mouth, she writes, lip donut. Around the face, she identifies the squeaky squeal region. And to the ear, the arrow points out baby cabbages. So funny. And here is anatomy of a snail. It has googly eyes and enchanted retractable wiggle stalks. It has a compact mobile home on its back. This squirrel has a nut nibbler mouth and tufty fluffies for its ears. So let's make a diagram of an animal or a pet that you love. This is my cat, Trudy. I stared at her and took pictures and started noticing her details. Look at these phantom black little tippy toes. Look at those tickly whiskers. Look at her fluffy underside. So when you're going to make a diagram, it helps to really study and do lots of tries. I practiced drawing my cat many times, so I knew that her body was kind of an oval shape. Her head was kind of round with a point on the bottom, and she had triangle ears. You can use your creativity too, or look at a picture of any animal you like. I drew a long tail and 4 legs.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And now I will be sure to get back into presentation mode. So that's one example of a kind of a video that's really, it's going to be an incredible resource for that teacher to use over time, year over year, that was able to be created because the in-person learning was not occupying as much of the teacher's time. In addition to the many teacher videos that have been created, we continued to have the teacher groups meet, the teacher planning networks, to create now deeper, more academically intense and far-reaching curriculum that could be taught because the in-person, sorry, not in-person, it's still virtual, but the synchronous classes were beginning to happen again. One thing that was added, so this is a resource that was created around reimagining monuments that was created for a middle school group. And this also had built into it social emotional learning competencies that were added to all of our resources to give teachers a way to help support students' social emotional needs during this time. Here's Mark Gunderson. He's going to talk a little bit about his highs, lows, and shifts in pedagogy with his experience at Fabian K-8.
My name is Mark Gunderson, and I am the K-8 teacher at Fabian Elementary, or Fabian K-8 in Northeast Portland. And I teach art from pre-K all the way up to 8th grade. One of the challenges for me this past year in working remotely and teaching remotely is trying to find projects and create projects that will work with all students based on what materials they might have at home, because they're all coming to the classroom with different materials. Some just have pencil and paper, some have clay and paint, some kids are just doing art on their Chromebooks. This has actually turned into one of the highlights for me because I've gotten to see artwork that kids wouldn't normally be able to create in the classroom, and it allows the students to actually work with the materials that they're most comfortable with in creating artwork to kind of fit the theme and project that I give them. And one of the ways that it might help me change my practice is just to allow students the flexibility to have a little bit more say in the materials that they work with when I give them a project in class when we get back into the classroom. Thanks.
So this was something that I've heard many teachers echo, that there are, for instance, creating gigantic cardboard sculptures out of cereal boxes and toilet paper tubes. There is a limit to how many students you can have do this in a classroom together at the same time. However, when they're working at home, I'm sure their parents were all just totally thrilled about this also. Each student can build a gigantic sculpture out of as much cardboard as they want because you don't have the same space limitations. Kids could create art in their pajamas, using things in their kitchen, taking photographs of themselves in their surroundings. So it really activated the students' homes as a site for creating art, not limited to the art classroom.
My name is
So he mentioned more about supplies, and one thing that the district did start this fall is a campaign to get not just art supplies, but they were called home classroom kits, the most necessary instructional resources for all subjects out to as many students as possible, leaning in particularly to students who qualify for free and reduced meals and to Title I schools. For visual arts, we, as usual, provided sketchbooks for all students. Also course-specific materials for high schools based on free and reduced populations, whether that was clay for ceramics courses or drawing, painting, printmaking materials for 2D courses. There were specialized materials for K-5, including some high tactile items for K-2. These are really important for giving students an opportunity to develop fine motor skills. So a kindergartner who may struggle with colored pencils, for instance, can engage their hands much more with modeling clay. We also provided tapestry needles and embroidery floss and burlap so that there could be further complex motions. And also moving beyond just working in a sketchbook. This post here is from Molly Renauer, who teaches at Mount Tabor, showing an example of one of the acrylic paint kits that was sent out that students were able to create art with. Okay, so I'm going to pivot now to talk a little bit about the Heart of Portland, our annual celebration of visual and performing arts from PPS. So in a normal year, this would culminate with an incredible showcase that would take place at the museum in the Grand Ballroom. And then we would also have for 2 weeks a visual arts exhibition capturing at least one artwork from all of our programs, so 100 images, K-12 spectrum selected by teachers to represent their programs, in addition to collaborative art projects where many more students were able to participate. So you can see there in the 2019 Heart of Portland, the last one that we were able to have in person, you have the poster that was designed by a student that won as part of a poster competition. The showcase started off by a marching band coming in and really animating and activating the space and starting things off with a bang. And then a glimpse into the visual arts gallery that is in the Miller Ballroom. So this year for Heart of Portland, we still wanted to keep some of the major components that are essential to the project. In addition to the showcase piece, there are a lot of curricular elements that are developed because the whole program connects to an exhibition that's running concurrent with the Heart of Portland. So for this year, we're looking closely at the Ansel Adams exhibition. Teachers still met to create resources, activities that their students could do to connect to themes that were identified that relate to the exhibition. So for the first theme for the Ansel Adams in Our Time exhibition, it was internal and external landscapes. And then the second theme is the power of photography and interpretation. There is also usually a PD component where we would bring all of the art teachers down for a day of learning together at the art museum. While we weren't able to do that, we were able to have an educator event where curator Julia Dolan came and talked specifically to our educators about the exhibition. And then the projects that I mentioned, so the internal and external landscapes theme is a project called Postcards to the Earth. And the idea was to take the concept of a landscape that you would buy on a postcard as a token of a trip, that as a souvenir. And instead of it being a souvenir of a trip that you've gone on, it's a landscape that is something that's around your home. So how are you engaging with nature in even a very small way in your neighborhood or near your home? And what thank you can you say to nature, to that environment for what it is, how it is providing you emotional sustenance during this challenging time. The second project is around the theme of the power of photography and interpretation. And this is designed as a 612 project that is based off the idea of still life photography, but where you are gathering and assembling objects together that you are photographing and then using digital manipulation techniques. So this was both an analog and a digital project that teachers brought into their classrooms. One of the most exciting parts of Heart of Portland is the collaborative project, and we are able to replicate a version of that. So we are using the Postcards to the Earth project that I was just talking about. There were kits distributed to 4,000 students that are creating these postcards to the Earth. Some of the postcards from each of those classrooms are going to be sent in directly to be shown at the museum, so they'll be in the hanging suspended in the gift shop windows, visible on the inside and the outside of the museum for the month of June. There will also be site specific, so many of the schools that are participating in the project are also installing the rest of their postcards in their schools so that they'll be visible by communities across the city. And as a thank you, this is, very full circle then, the Portland Art Museum has created these beautiful postcards featuring images from the exhibition that will go out to as thank yous to all of the students who are participating in the collaborative project. And then finally, while we can't have an in-person showcase, we will be having a virtual showcase on June 10th, as well as our online gallery will be featuring those selected artworks from each program for the month of June, highlighting K-12 learning in the arts across this strange year. There'll be more information about that program on our website, ppsarts.com, and it will also show up as part of the in the museum's blog. I've got one last video for you, and then be thinking of those questions that you might want to pose. This is Tara Carmichael, who teaches at Whitman Elementary.
Hello, my name's Tara Carmichael, and I am the Whitman Elementary School K-5 visual arts teacher. I'm coming to you live from my home base studio teaching. And I would like to share some information with you. My highlights of this year teaching online have been networking with my teacher planning group and having this opportunity to research and upgrade and uplift all of our lesson plans. And what I mean by that is having the time to find all of the different amazing BIPOC artists that we can infuse into our equity-based lesson plans and help them grow and reflect our kids and our communities. One of my biggest challenges at Whitman School is attendance. We have a hard time getting our young artists to show up for specials. So I'm not alone. PE teacher has the same thing happening. So we try all sorts of different ways of reaching out and going to the community to help find answers and solutions. And that's been awesome, but it's also been a challenge. And we do a lot of research trying to figure out like what's going to help. And then we figure out what doesn't work. So it's good. Well, it's good to keep trying, right? Let's see. Oh, something that's changed about how I'm going to be teaching in the future is probably the fact that I now have a giant pack of samples and examples that I've never had before. That bag right there is filled with samples. I have never had the opportunity to make samples or have samples for every project, because when you're teaching in person, you're always moving around, helping everybody. So when you're teaching on the computer, you can actually keep working and working. So it's gonna change everything. I just know it. But anyway, it's been awesome to talk to you, and I think I have checked off the boxes that I was supposed to be. And with that, signing off with my magic wand.
One of our stellar arts educators, and just a joyful person to be around, Tara Carmichael. So I guess I would just reiterate a few of those points that were raised. This year is not a situation that anybody would have wanted to have happen. And the negative impact of being out of school is really serious. It's going to be a real challenge for everyone to bounce back from. That being said, there are some profound shifts that will have positive ramifications, lasting positive ramifications. And while it might feel a little too early to be looking at those silver linings, it is exciting to know that they're there and to imagine how they will continue to transform education moving forward. I want to end by thanking the City of Portland for the continued support of arts education through the arts tax. Without the arts tax, we would not have equity in access to K-5 arts teachers in our schools. So we are very grateful for that foundation on which we are building really transformative arts learning for all of the students in the city. With that, I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I think Jaleesa is going to hop on here with me, and we will answer any questions that you might have.
Yes, thank you, Carolyn. And just a reminder, if you're with us on Zoom, please enter your questions into the Q&A box. And then if you're with us on Facebook Live, just enter your questions into the chat and they'll find their way over here. And while folks are maybe gathering their thoughts and processing all the information and thinking about what questions they have, I already have 2 questions of my own that surfaced when you were talking. And the first one you actually addressed towards the end when you had mentioned just like that this moment in time has created some like very specific lasting changes. And I would just love to hear more about that. What is it? What are some of the things that teachers, and from that video, that educator had also sort of spoken to some of the cool things that have come out of this moment. It's been really hard, no doubt, but I feel like there have been a lot of valuable learning lessons. And I'm so interested to see how people in the arts take those lessons and continue to lean into them even as we reopen.
Yeah, I think there are a couple more things that I would add to that. One is, we had the technology to do virtual meetings before the pandemic. And most of certainly our art teachers K-8, they are the only person in their building who is teaching that subject area. And so we had historically really tried to find ways to bring our arts educators together after the school day by connecting them by the end of the day bell schedule, which varies from school to school, and by how far away, how long does it take to drive from this school to this school. And now we can do that just by having the meetings using Zoom. And so that became normalized so quickly. But you heard each of the teachers talk about collaboration as something that has been really profound this year. And that has been because of the collapsing of distance and time through these virtual meetings. Another thing is how to embed those learning technology systems or the learning management systems alongside in-person learning to deepen the communication part with back and forth feedback between families, students, and teachers. And then I would speak to music specifically. There is incredible software specifically around music skills and technique development that has now become embedded as part of practice that was not really done in a universal way before. So that's going to be extremely helpful. For visual arts, having now all of these recorded videos, that is going to improve. I mean, those will just be a bank to draw on for years and years to come. So those are a few ways that I can think of.
And something else, this is more of like a comment, if anything, but I was really interested in that initial assignment for students to just like scavenger hunt for materials. And I think I love that so much because I feel like often when you go into like an art class or something, you're learning new materials, or maybe it is a material you've worked with before, but it's more traditional. And so I also imagine that too, the scavenger hunt and allowing students to integrate materials that they're more familiar with into the practice of learning will also be a part of like leaning into this change moving forward.
It's also an example of asset-based rather than deficit-based practice. So rather than providing a Google form that has a list of all of these art supplies that students are faced with having to say yes or no, and if they don't have them, then they just had the lived experience of going through and marking all of the ways which they're not prepared for what's coming. As opposed to a scavenger hunt where you're bringing together what you have from a place of curiosity and exploration, and that's the starting point. And that is a really crucial shift in how we think about all kinds of differently abled students and what their experiences are in the school district. And that's just one tiny little example of it, but it's really important anytime there's that opportunity to shift to that asset-based thinking and practice.
Yes, thank you. I love that. And then another question that I have, which you had actually touched on this as well when you were talking and throughout the presentation, but I'm just so curious. As someone who also is an educator, I'm really interested in the ways that like teachers have been supporting each other. And you'd mentioned, a few things like the teacher planning networks and, that meeting at the end to like come together at the end of the day. But I just would love to hear more about, because this has been rough for educators too, this has been really, really challenging. And so just the way that you all are helping to support one another.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question, because right now still, all educators are so grateful to the state of Oregon for being prioritized in terms of having access to the vaccine. That being said, there are still, of course, a lot of limitations around convening in person. And boy, let me tell you, no art teacher became an art teacher to spend their day on a computer. So at the end of this year, they are going to want to step away, myself included. So how do we create opportunities for connection, deepening practice, reflection, but also not add to the very real burnout that is just a thing. One exciting thing that has just come up, I've been working closely with Michelle Illuminato, who teaches at PSU, and we created this idea, and then she built a course out of it. It's a studio class designed for art teachers that's at the graduate level, and that is going to be in your studio, hands-on art making, very much joyful, very much about reemergence and processing where teachers have been using art making themselves. And then, yes, maybe there will be application to the classroom in the fall, but that's not the focus of the course. It's really time to dive into their own practice wherever they are with it. And so that's one small effort, but meaningful effort that, and please, if you have any other ideas, let me know, because that's the $1 million question right now.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, even where I'm at, there's like a lot of convenings, but I think we're still trying to figure out how to support one another. I think for me, the biggest thing that has been really helpful is just acknowledging we're not robots. And we are like, there's a lot of rest that's needed. And even that conversation, it just wasn't a conversation that was happening that often before. So I hope that sticks around, because man, being human, being alive.
We're creatures.
Yeah.
I see that there's a question that Chris has about the BESC. So those of you who are watching who aren't familiar with that, that's our district office that is down by the Moda Center. And historically, the BESC features 2 galleries of student artwork that rotates over the course of the year. This year, we haven't had access to physical copies of analog art. So we've had the virtual gallery. That being said, this summer, our Summer Arts Academy will be convening in person. And there will be the artwork that's created during that Summer Arts Academy will be installed in the BESC for the fall. So we're really excited to say, yes, come September, there will be art back in the BESC. And then we'll start that process again, where now that students will be back in classrooms, we'll be able to keep those galleries going. And we'll also be able to have those works up at the virtual gallery. So that will now be a broader platform for students to see, or for community members to see that art without having to go to the district office.
Thank you. And just to read the question out for folks, the question was, is the BESC lobby showcasing student art as it had pre-COVID? Cool. And if the audience members have any further questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A or to enter them into the chat on Facebook.
Hey, Jaleesa and Carolyn, I thought I would jump in for a moment. This is Hannah Layson. I work as the head of youth and educator programs at the Portland Art Museum, which means I'm lucky enough to get to work with these 2 wonderful people all the time. Carolyn, I wanted to ask you a question looking ahead. What are some of your hopes for our partnership between the Art Museum and PPS?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest and brightest spot on the horizon for me is the Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera and Mexican Modernism exhibition that's coming next year. And I know we've talked about how like the entire city of Portland is really ecstatic already about this exhibition. Is hotly anticipated. And there are going to be, I just think, everyone is so excited. I'd like to have some sort of analog reality that I think the timing of that show being winter and spring is going to coincide with really this feeling of, yes, we can be together, and that yes, we're coming out now to the next spring, the next reemergence. And so getting as many students down and into that exhibition and being able to see art in person, the textures, the materiality, that's not just a digital projection. That is something that I am just like so hungry to see happening again. And then also how we can leverage the technology that has existed to shine a light on. I mean, one of the amazing things we have usually like 40 events a month that are happening at school sites around visual and performing arts. It's crazy. Like so many people are making art, performing, presenting, and that we can make sure that more people are seeing those things. I think it's easy to feel like the arts are always under fire because they're historically under-resourced, but there are really incredible things happening with public arts education, specifically in PPS, and I want to make sure that that gets celebrated and highlighted in all of the communities where it's happening. What are your ideas, Hannah?
Yes to all of that and more. And I know we're kind of winding down the hour, so I also just want to be able to extend a huge thank you to you and to all of the PPS arts administrators and teachers and students. We are so grateful for this partnership. It really means a lot to us at the museum, and we want to keep working with you to look for more ways to create opportunities for student learning and teacher learning, and also the presentation and celebration of student work. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Hannah. And something that I just wanted to leave our viewers with before we depart from this lovely lunchtime talk is just a reminder to come out and support, or maybe not come out, but also virtually tap in and support students and their work. So just a reminder that we will have the postcards to the earth up and viewable through June. They should be up by June 1st. And then there's also the virtual showcase that's taking place online, and that's on June 10th.
Thanks for the shout out, Jaleesa. Thanks to everyone for attending today and for supporting arts education in Portland.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you all have a lovely afternoon. And we will see you next month for Art and Conversation. Bye.
Bye.